Why do you stop at a traffic light? Think about it. Really think about it. Is it because you're afraid you'll be fined if you don't? Or is it because you believe that it's the right thing to do? Hello and welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, we are going to try and understand some of the big questions that have perplexed legal philosophers for centuries. And these questions are, what is law? And why do we follow law? Let's get started. These questions sound straightforward enough, right? You're probably thinking to yourself, surely this isn't that difficult to answer. The best way I can try and explain the complexity of these questions is by drawing an analogy to what St. Augustine said about time. He said, "What then is time? If no one asks me, I know what it is. If I wish to explain it to him who asks, I do not know." Basically, what this quotation is saying is that these questions do sound quite simple. In fact, we feel like we know the answers to these questions. But if someone asks us to answer this question, then suddenly we don't have the answer. Now, what you have to understand is that there is an entire course of study dedicated to answering this very question, which is called jurisprudence. And if you are a law student, you have to pass this subject in order to become a lawyer. And in this study, there are lots of legal theories that try to answer the questions, what is law and why do we follow the law? For example, theories like Marxism, feminism, realism all provide different interpretations to answer these questions. But two of the most prominent theories that have tried to answer these complex questions is positivism and natural law. Let's start with legal positivism. Now, legal positivism takes the stance that law is a set of rules and guidelines created by human beings themselves to govern human beings. More specifically, these are created by the sovereign, the ruler, the state, the parliament, the governing body, whatever you want to call it. But the most important thing about legal positivism is that it believes that law's validity is not in any way dependent on morality. It believes that provided the laws are created by the right source and follows the correct procedure, those will be valid laws in that country. So basically, the rulers of the country would be able to pass any law they want without any regard for whether it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, provided they follow the procedure. For example, according to positivism, the government could pass a completely irrational law that says kill all blue-eyed babies without any regard for whether it's moral to pass such a law or not, provided they simply follow the right procedure. Now, obviously, throughout history, there are many writers who have discussed positivism and in fact endorsed it. Among them, one of the pioneers was the writer called John Austin. He believed that the law was a command made by a sovereign backed by sanctions. Essentially, what he's saying is that a rule becomes a valid law when it, number one, is commanded by a king or a government or a ruler of the country, and secondly, when the command has some kind of punishment or sanctions attached for non-obedience. Now, based on this philosophy, a law becomes valid not because it's the moral or the right thing to do, but because the ruler decides to create that law and he has the ability to punish the citizens if they don't obey it. Let's use this theory on our traffic light example. According to Austin, a law that says stop at a traffic light is followed because you will get punished, that is, you will be fined if you don't follow the law. So what is law according to Austin? Law is something that the sovereign commands which can impose a punishment on us. And why do we follow the law? Because we are afraid of the punishment. Of course, Austin is just one positivist writer. There are other famous writers like Hart and Kelsen who also belong to this positivist school of thought. Now let's turn our attention to natural law philosophy. Natural law believes that the law is inherently connected to morality and that there are universal moral standards that underpin a legal system. According to natural law theorists, this morality can be discovered by consulting our reasoning power, which is common to every human being. Basically, natural law believes that there are objective and universal moral principles that are inherent to all human beings, which can be identified by consulting our reasoning power. And this theory believes that whenever a law is passed by a governing body like a parliament, it must satisfy these universal moral principles. And if the law fails to satisfy these moral principles, these rules will not only be evil laws, but they will be not law at all. So for example, according to natural law, a law that is passed by parliament that says kill all blue-eyed babies will not be moral and therefore not be law at all. This concept of natural law predates positive law theory, and therefore its roots can be traced all the way back to the Greek philosophers. For example, Socrates believed that there existed principles of morality which can be discovered through man's reasoning and insight. Plato believed that concepts of good, justice, virtue, and honesty are eternal and immutable. Therefore, he believed that these moral principles must be used to judge the actions of humans. And in the medieval period, writers like St. Thomas Aquinas integrated this idea of natural law to Christian theology and connected this idea of morality to the idea of God. He believed that this reasoning power of man was given to man by God, and therefore any law passed in society must align with the teachings of God. So according to natural law, what is law? Law is a directive which is made by the state which must align with universal morality. And why do we follow the law? Because it tells us the moral or the right thing to do. Now, of course, this is just a handful of writers who believed in this natural law philosophy, and there are lots of other writers, including more modern writers like John Finnis, who tried to develop natural law in line with modern contemporary legal issues. So, which school of thought do you belong to? Now, you have to understand that both these theories have a lot of advantages and also some very legitimate criticisms. One of the biggest advantages of legal positivism is that it separates the law from morality. Therefore, it avoids the subjectivity of moral judgments. What I mean here is that different people have different measurements of what morality is. And if we say that a law is valid only if it is moral, and people disagree on what morality is, then we could be placed in a situation where we don't know whether to follow a particular law or not. And this could lead to anarchy. In that way, legal positivism is clear and predictable. It makes it very easy to identify a valid law. Basically, if the law has followed the correct procedure and it has been passed based on the direction of a person who has the right to make that law, then that is a valid law. This in turn means that it supports more efficient governance. This is because if we follow positivism, the law will provide very clear guidelines to judges, to lawmakers, and to the citizens as to what the law is. But what are the big criticisms of legal positivism? The biggest criticism leveled against legal positivism is moral blindness. Critics argue that by separating law from morality, it could result in a lot of evil laws being passed in society by simply following the correct procedure. For example, you could pass a law that says kill all blue-eyed babies using the correct procedure, and this law would be valid if the law had no connection to morality. This may also lead to authoritarian regimes. If the persons making the law are not expected to uphold any kind of moral standard, then they could pass any law they want, which may result in an authoritarian state. Think about the laws that were passed and followed by the Nazi regime. If there was an expectation that the rulers would uphold moral standards when they pass laws, then so many of the Nazi laws would not be considered valid law. Now let's consider the flip side of this. What are the pros and cons of natural law theory? The most obvious positive of natural law theory is that it provides moral legitimacy. By grounding man-made law in universal moral principles, natural law philosophy provides a basis for the moral legitimacy of legal norms. Basically, laws are considered to be valid only if they align with these higher principles. And if a particular law does not align with these higher moral principles, then that would not be considered law in that system. Further, the universal nature of natural law principles can provide a common ground for different cultures and legal systems on what should and should not be allowed and tolerated. This means that there will be some kind of harmony amongst all legal systems as to what kind of protections need to be given to its citizens. Natural law theory also has been instrumental in the development of human rights. This is because these universal moral standards will emphasize the need for human dignity and the rights of all individuals to be protected in every legal system. But there is also one big criticism when it comes to natural law. Critics argue that natural law can be subjective as different individuals and cultures may have varying interpretations of what constitutes natural moral principles. Basically, if morality is the yardstick by which we measure whether a law is valid or not, different people may start to follow and not follow different laws based on whether they believe they are moral or not. With this also comes the difficulty of implementing and enforcing laws based on moral principles. This is because there would have to be a consensus on ethical standards, and this is difficult to achieve because of the subjective nature of morality. So in conclusion, natural law theory and legal positivism are both very different but equally prominent legal theories which help us to understand the nature and the purpose of law. Understanding these theories will not only give us an appreciation for legal philosophy, but it will also help us to navigate complex legal and ethical issues which keep arising in this ever-evolving society. For example, when judging whether something like the Nazi laws are valid or not, we may lean more towards natural law philosophy and make the argument that these laws are not valid because they don't satisfy the universal moral principles. On the other hand, somebody else might make the argument that morality has nothing to do with the validity of law, and provided these laws were passed using the correct procedures, then they are in fact laws in that system. In short, there isn't a clear answer as to which one is better. In fact, during different times in history, both these theories have been the more preferred option. Anyway, that's it for this episode. Thank you for joining me as we discuss the differences between legal positivism and natural law theory. If you like this episode, please do consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. If you have any questions or any thoughts, please do leave them in the comments below. I'll see you in another episode. Take care. Bye.